Imagine this: a woman now in her 80s, frail, quiet, but her eyes still burning with memory, finally whispers the truth about the man the world called a genius. The world remembers him as a Beatle, a voice of peace, a legend silenced too soon. But what if the story of John Lennon and Yoko Ono wasn't the love story we thought it was? What if behind the imagined piano keys, there were secrets the world was never meant to hear? For decades, Yoko Ono has carried the weight of blame, of myth, and of love that defied every rule. But now, at 82, she speaks not as the widow of a Beatle, but as the keeper of his most private truth. A truth about love, about rebellion, and about the one night that changed how Lennon saw himself and the world. This is not a story about fame. It's a story about the cost of being human, about how two wounded souls from opposite sides of the world collided and created both beauty and chaos. Tonight, we go beyond the headlines, beyond the songs, into the life that even the Beatles never truly knew. Because before there was Imagine, there was pain. Before there was peace, there was war. A war inside John Lennon's heart. Welcome to the secret world of John and Yoko. Before the fame, before the world knew their names, there were just two lonely children. One in war-torn England, the other in a burning Tokyo sky. John Lennon was born on October 9th, 1914 in Liverpool, a city battered by bombs and loss. His father, a merchant seaman, was rarely home. His mother, Julia, was wild, beautiful, and heartbreakingly unstable. When she couldn't care for him, John was sent to live with his strict Aunt Mimi. But every so often, Julia would reappear, laughing, playing the banjo, teaching John the joy of rhythm and melody. And then, just as suddenly, she was gone forever. At 17, John lost his mother to a car accident just a few streets away from his home. The tragedy didn't just break him, it shaped him. The pain became his muse, the loss became his language. Every lyric he would later write, every word about love, loneliness, and rebellion came from that wound that never truly healed. Meanwhile, across the world, another child was growing up in silence. Yoko Ono, born February 18, 1933, came from a world of wealth and refinement. Her father was a respected banker. Her mother descended from Japanese nobility. She learned to play classical piano before she could write her name. Her childhood was steeped in culture, in etiquette, in perfection. But then came the fire. World War II turned Tokyo into a nightmare. Yoko and her family fled into the countryside, surviving on rice husks and the scraps. The little girl who once played Mozart now listened to bombs and silence. That silence, heavy and endless, would become the foundation of her art. While others rebuilt cities, Yoko began rebuilding meaning itself, through sound, through concept, through imagination. Two souls, one from the ruins of England, one from the ashes of Japan, both scarred by war, by loss, by the need to feel. They didn't know it yet, but destiny was already weaving their pain into a single song, a song that would one day change the world. It began with a ladder. November 1966, London's Indica Gallery, the haven for the estranged, the radical, and the new. John Lennon, at the height of Beatlemania, walked in that night not looking for art, but for distraction. On the ceiling, he saw a small white canvas. To read it, he had to climb a ladder and look through a magnifying glass. At the very top, one single word waited for him. Yes. John later said, most art is just no, or what the hell. But hers was yes. In that moment, something shifted inside him. He had met countless people, fans, artists, dreamers, but none who made him look up. Yoko Ono had done that literally and spiritually. At the time, both were married, both trapped in lives that no longer fit. But the pull between them was electric, like two storms recognizing each other across the sky. By 1968, their friendship had turned into a love that ignored rules, titles, and expectations. John left his wife, Cynthia. Yoko stepped fully into his life, not as a mistress, but as a mirror. Their art became their love language. Their naked cover photo for two virgins shocked the world, not for lust, but for honesty. They weren't showing bodies, they were showing truth. Then came their sound experiments, strange, raw, full of screams, whispers, and silence. Critics called it madness. John called it freedom. He once said, "Working with Yoko freed my mind more than LSD ever could." When they married in 1969, their honeymoon wasn't in luxury. It was in protest. They turned their hotel room in Amsterdam into a battlefield for peace. The bed-in. White sheets, handwritten signs, and one message: war is over if you want it. In that bed, John and Yoko sang "Give Peace a Chance," surrounded by cameras, flowers, and chaos. The world laughed, but history remembered. For the first time, love wasn't just personal. It was political. It wasn't just two people in love. It was two rebels trying to change the world from under a blanket. By the early 1970s, the world wasn't just watching John Lennon, what they were judging him. And at the center of that storm stood one woman, Yoko Ono. To many fans, she was the villain, the woman who broke up the Beatles. To the tabloids, she was the cold, manipulative outsider who had stolen Britain's golden sun. But the truth, as always, was far more complicated. Inside Abbey Road Studios, the tension was already building long before Yoko arrived. Paul McCartney and John clashed over creative control. George Harrison was tired of being overshadowed. Even Ringo, the quiet peacekeeper, briefly quit the band. The magic that had once united four young men was dissolving under the weight of fame, money, and ego. Then came Yoko, sitting quietly beside John during recording sessions. She didn't belong there, at least not by the unspoken rules of the boys' club. But John wanted her there. She wasn't just his lover. She was his voice of reason, his muse, his mirror. Her presence shattered the Beatles' delicate balance. To John, she was liberation. To everyone else, she was intrusion. And when the band finally collapsed in 1970, the world found its scapegoat. Yoko broke up the Beatles. A myth repeated so often it became history. But years later, even Paul McCartney admitted the band was already breaking up. Yoko didn't cause it. She gave John the courage to leave. John no longer wanted to be just a Beatle. He wanted to be himself, to create without limits, to scream, to protest, to love loudly and unapologetically. He poured his rebirth into Plastic Ono Band, raw and as stripped bare. The sound of a man tearing down every wall around him. Then came Imagine, co-conceived with Yoko, her fingerprints all over its quiet vision of peace. The lyric "Imagine no possessions" was lifted from her art book Grapefruit. It was no longer just John Lennon, the Beatle. It was John and Yoko, partners in love and in revolution. But that revolution came with a price. The same world that once worshipped him now turned its back. Concerts were boycotted, letters poured in filled with hate, and yet through it all, Yoko stayed calm, still, unshaken. In public, they were symbols of peace. In private, they were two fragile souls fighting to stay whole. In the spring of 1963, years before Yoko, before Imagine, before the peace protests, John Lennon took a quiet trip to Spain. No cameras, no bandmates, no wives, just John and Brian Epstein, the Beatles' manager, and one of the few openly gay men in the British music scene at that time. To the public, it was a vacation, but to those who knew John, it was something else entirely, a moment of curiosity, of intimacy, of searching. For decades, rumors swirled that something happened between Lennon and Epstein on that trip to Barcelona. And though Lennon always brushed it off with humor, there was something in his eyes whenever it was mentioned. Years later, in one of his final interviews with Playboy, John finally said, "Well, it was almost a love affair, but not quite. It was never consummated, but we were very close." He admitted Brian was in love with him, and that maybe deep down he didn't reject it, because he too was searching for something he couldn't name. John was raised in a world where men weren't allowed to be vulnerable, but inside he was a storm of contradiction, tenderness wrapped in rebellion, loneliness disguised as arrogance. Then, decades later, Yoko Ono broke her silence. In a 2015 interview with Time, she confessed, "John and I talked a lot about bisexuality. He said it's something everybody goes through. It's natural. I think he had a desire to try it, but he was too inhibited." Her words weren't scandal, they were truth, not to shock the world, but to humanize him, to remind us that John Lennon, the man who sang Imagine, was still a man, a soul wrestling with identity, love, and fear. That trip to Spain wasn't about betrayal. It was about longing for connection, for understanding, for freedom. It wasn't just breaking musical boundaries. It was breaking the walls inside himself. Yoko understood that side of him, the parts he never showed the world. She once said, "John was always searching for love, even when he already had it, and maybe that's why they found each other, two misfits who refused to fit in, even with each other." When Lennon died in 1980, Yoko didn't just lose her husband. She lost the only person who saw the world the way she did, as a song still unfinished. December 8th, 1980. Outside the Dakota Building in New York City, the world stopped breathing. A gunshot, then silence. John Lennon, the man who once sang "Give Peace a Chance," lay dying in Yoko Ono's arms. The world expected her to collapse, to vanish into grief, but Yoko did what she had always done. She turned pain into art. In the days after his death, she asked the world not for revenge, but for silence, a 10-minute moment of global reflection. Millions of people across continents stopped for John, for peace, for love, and then she carried on. Her 1981 album, Season of Glass, bore a haunting cover, John's blood-stained glasses resting beside a half-filled cup of water. No filter, no metaphor, just truth, a symbol of loss, fragile yet unbroken. Through the years, Yoko became the guardian of John's legacy, curating his unreleased works, organizing exhibitions, and preserving his voice for future generations. But she also reclaimed her own. She returned to performance art, to avant-garde exhibitions, to music that blurred the line between sound and silence. In 2007, she unveiled the Imagine Peace Tower in Iceland, a radiant column of light piercing the night sky each year between John's birthday and the day he died. Etched into its base are the words "Imagine Peace" in 24 languages. Her tribute wasn't built of marble or gold, but of light. The one thing John had always tried to bring into the world. Even into her 80s, Yoko continued creating. Remixes of her early sound pieces climbed dance charts. Collaborations with young artists brought her message to new generations. The woman once mocked for being weird was now celebrated as a visionary. Time has softened the world's judgment. No longer the villain, she's seen for what she truly was, a muse, a rebel, a survivor, and perhaps most of all, the woman who dared to love John Lennon completely when the rest of the world only wanted to worship him. Together, they taught us something timeless, that love is an act of defiance, that peace is not passive, it is radical, and that art, when born from truth, can outlive death. Even now, as Yoko sits in silence at 82, her words linger like an echo across decades. War is over if you want it, because John may be gone, but the light they lit together still burns. If this story moved you, share it. Let their message ripple through the noise. Type "imagine" or "give peace a chance" in the comments. Let the world see their legacy through you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel where stories like these live on. Because peace and truth only survive when we pass them on.